Have Kuma's memories returned since the deal was broken, or when the bubble was popped? So what we're trying to do here is figure out the mystery of what triggered Kuma to suddenly snap on Momoiro Island and get to Egghead as quickly as possible. Because up until whatever it was, he was being a very, very good boy. He was just sitting there chilling, letting Lindbergh try to repair him. But look, to figure this out, we kind of need to figure out the timeline of Egghead Island, which is very tricky to put together because we've been traveling all over the Grand Line. You know, we go to Hachinosu, we go to Winter Island, we go to Elbaf, we go to Momoiro Island, we go to Marijois, and none of this is necessarily happening at the exact same time as the corresponding Egghead events as presented to us. To make things even more confusing, on 2 occasions we even go into full-on flashbacks, which takes us back in time. And actually, Egghead Island is one of the very few arcs in One Piece to have 2 fully fleshed out flashbacks, Kuma and the Reverie. And then we even have a time skip on Egghead Island, skipping the night where everyone foiled York and the Seraphim, so Egghead Island is just, it's a bit of a nightmare for keeping track of time. But look, let's try to figure this out. So potential trigger point number 1. This is what happens if we take things at face value as presented by Oda. So the actual time that we saw Kuma get up and pop away was in chapter 1067. And as presented to us, Kuma suddenly leaves Momoiro Island just as Rob Lucci and CP0 arrive on Egghead Island, which is also pretty much the exact same moment that Bonnie comes into contact with Stella. To be specific, it was right after Bonnie fainted after threatening Vegapunk with the lightsaber that summons all the bugs, so maybe there was some combination of Bonnie both being in trouble and on Egghead that triggered Kuma there. It feels a bit underwhelming, but imagine if that actually was the answer. It's not anything grand or dramatic. Kuma was just made aware that his daughter was afraid of something. That something, you know, being small bugs. Doesn't matter what it was, his fatherly instinct spurred him into action. And to be fair, what Kuma found when he arrived on Egghead Island was a giant arachnid, so you know, the bug problem is pretty real. And I know that spiders aren't bugs, but I'm one of those people who just does not care. I live in Australia, so I don't have the luxury of semantics when facing off against all of the giant creatures constantly trying to kill me. But the second potential trigger point is Bonnie touching Kuma's memories, because we know that the pain bubbles get absorbed permanently by whoever takes them on first come, first serve. But we don't know for sure if the memory bubbles function in the same way. It could be that Bonnie touching the memory bubble then returns the memories to Kuma. And then Kuma, with his brain back, wasted no time in leaving. The logic being that he would know exactly where Bonnie is because he knows exactly where the memories are. And here's the touching part. He might not even have thought she was in danger. It's just that after experiencing his entire life, Kuma may have felt the need to be there to comfort Bonnie because, as we've all just experienced, Kuma's life contains some pretty heavy stuff. Then of course trigger point number 3 might be receiving the sapphire necklace, just in case it has any special inbuilt science program to react to Bonnie, and it might be part of Vegapunk's personality switch mechanism that he may or may not have done. I'm not as keen on this one because every time we've overanalyzed something small like this during the Egghead arc, the answer has usually been it was just a sweet gift or a sweet gesture. Then again, Vegapunk did say it was a protective charm, so it could be something. But then trigger point number 4, and this is what the commenter was alluding to, but it may be Saturn breaking their deal by threatening and actively trying to kill Bonnie. It could even have been Vegapunk himself who flipped the emergency personality switch upon seeing the developing situation with Saint Saturn. Although this one it might be slightly difficult to believe because it would mean that Kuma was able to get all the way from Momoiro Island to Egghead Island in a matter of minutes, which very much goes against the travel time that we've seen the Straw Hat Stake, the whole 3-day venture. The whole 3-day thing doesn't really matter because as presented to us, Kuma definitely gets from Momoiro Island to Egghead Island in a day, less than a day. And we also see in chapter 1098 that Kuma went from East Blue to South Blue seemingly instantly when the Revolutionary Army HQ called for help. So maybe Kuma can travel far more quickly than we realize. I really love that Kuma, by the way. It's one of my favorite pieces of channel art, and I often get asked in the comments where the art in my videos comes from. And the answer to that is that I have 3 artists who work to produce content for the channel. One of which, Tenguki Arts, has started a Redbubble store, which is linked in the description and contains a lot of channel artwork that you can get as fun stickers and posters. To be clear, none of the profits of this store go to me. This is all towards Tenguki. But if you're interested in having some of these amazing drawings for yourself, and I think you should be, then definitely check out his store, again linked in the description. Do you think Kuma's body using Haki is similar to Sindri's body from Thriller Bark, still having willpower? So they're similar but different. With Kuma, we're kind of asking the question of how much of a soul or personality remains in the body after the memories are taken away. Like what Dragon alludes to in the chapter talking about instinct, how much raw instinct remains. But Sindri was quite different, in that her body was given someone else's personality, because Dr. Hogback was such a corpse-obsessed mofo that he took Sindri's body and used Moria's abilities to give her the shadow of a girl named Margarita, a maid who lives in a place best described as somewhere and had a hatred of plates for some reason, which is why Sindri hates plates, because that's Margarita's personality coming through. Interestingly though, it was that powerful, dare I say, instinctual hatred of plates that led zombie Sindri to become capable of disobeying Hogback's orders to some degree, which is also the sort of thing we're seeing right now on Egghead Island with the Seraphim, because deep down they do retain their original personalities, or at least the seeds of that personality. And going back on Thriller Bark is quite fascinating, because when Moria takes Luffy's shadow, he makes a vow with it to erase Shadow Luffy's memories, which Hogback laments and says that he should have done so with Sindri, although what he means to say is Margarita. So it's very interesting that memories get brought up in Thriller Bark, which is a very important arc for Kuma as it turns out. So maybe it's not an accident that Oda used it to explore the theme of willpower, memories, and individuality there as well. Kuma could be alive, that's very true, but I like the idea that it is his fruit. Usually Zoans are the ones mainly with wills, but the quote, hands of revolution could be an exception. Well look, I'd even go a step further, because in the fictional pirate reading world we live in, we can't really take anything at face value anymore. Kuma might not even be a Paramecia fruit user. He could be yet another secret Zoan and or mythical Zoan, which could be hinted at by the pause, as well as Ginny's mental depiction of the fruit abilities, alongside the dragon Zoan in chapter 1096, which is the rather adorable kitty cat image. And that would be quite the situation, like a very convoluted way of making one of Vegapunk's classic living objects. Except this time what we did is we had a real person eat the fruit, and then in the most literal sense of the word, we objectified said person, removing any remaining sense of living being, replaced a lot of organs with all sorts of fun metals and stuff, and then over time the fruit's vessel has become an object. And because Zoan fruits have wills of their own, the poor fruit then inherits Kuma's body. I think that one's a pretty big stretch. Then again, anything's possible. One thing to note that a lot of people seem to have missed. When Kuma lands, he immediately says 30. I believe he probably has already activated self-destruct mode and has less than 30 seconds left. So this is a comment that I've been seeing a lot, and whilst the idea is kind of cool, the actual answer is that it's just a translation problem. When Kuma lands, some of the numerous scans this week decided not to translate the sound effect in this bubble, which to our Western swine eyes very much looks like the number 30, but it's actually the katakana yo and the katakana ro, which I will admit do look like a stylish 3 and 0 when put together, but in Japanese, yoda yoda is the onomatopoeia for shaking, wobbling, and general unsteadiness. So the idea here is that Kuma has landed on Egghead, but he's so injured/broken that he's struggling to get up. Yoda yoda yoda. And in general, I also want to reiterate that I have nothing against reading scans, but if you do, please read multiple sources and definitely read the official translation as well. Because this week especially, there were a lot of awful translations that were produced for the prestigious race to be first on the internet. Question/clarification request. Did Oda make a mistake drawing both of Kuma's feet? Alright, the feet thing. So I was thinking the same thing. In this chapter, we see Kuma on multiple occasions with 2 feet. And look, we're not shaming him for that. I myself have 2 feet. It's a very normal way to be, unless one of said feet has been previously melted away by magma. Then it's very unnormal. Which in chapter 1092, it was heavily implied, I mean I say heavily, but I feel like it was pretty definitely shown, that this foot was caught in magma and had been burned away. And it's not the only Kuma damage inconsistency either, because Sakazuki Sakazuki'd him by blowing away a chunk of Kuma's head. Not at all a Whitebeard-sized chunk, which is massive, but still, this is very aesthetically impactful damage. But in 1103, Kuma's head seems to be fully intact, because the epic punch panel at the end is shown from the perspective of the side of the head that was theoretically blown off. I mean, at the very least, his bear hat should have been damaged. I mean, what is that thing made of that it can defend against magma? But look, I don't know if Oda forgot, because he very specifically focused in on those moments, but maybe we, and actually no, I won't throw you in with this, you watching person, because you might be very clever and may not have read this way, but definitely me, maybe I misread the situation. Going back on the foot incident in particular, I guess we don't see it come off, so it could have made contact with the magma, but Kuma's just so powerful that he gets to keep his foot. Good on him. And I guess the key thing about this panel is seeing Kuma visibly showing signs of pain, which is quite a human thing to do. Earlier on, Sakazuki even says, well, at least you still bleed bleed like a man. So it might have been intended to hint that Kuma has that little bit of humanity within him still. It's funny though, because I have a little channel animation of Kuma fighting Sakazuki and leaving his foot behind, which a lot of people got really annoyed at the last time I used because they thought it was an editing error. And now, it's fair play to them because it actually is an error. The whole thing has come full circle and I'm not happy about it. I've been thinking, but since Bonnie literally experienced about 30 years worth of memories, wouldn't that effectively make her more mentally mature than a majority of the Straw Hats? Look, in theory, yes. Bonnie did just experience 45 whole years of life, because that's what Kuma's age was pre-time skip, but in practice, it's probably never going to be brought up like that. It actually reminds me a lot of an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation called The Inner Light, where Picard experiences something extremely similar. He's given the memories of an alien, and Picard then proceeds to live through until the end of said alien's life. It's actually very similar. I'm pretty sure that Picard experiences about 40 or so years, and he was like 60 years old at the time. So if you do the maths, about 40% of his total life experience so far was this completely different person. It's a sort of thing that would drastically change someone's personality. But then the next week, Picard was back to normal, and they never really did anything interesting with it. So if you want to go really deep, Bonnie has lived longer as her father than she has as herself. And at this point, she should probably be more Kuma than she is Bonnie. But that sort of idea is very complicated and messy, and honestly, I'm happy to skip over all of that, so long as we get to see the geriatric spider get punched in the face. So you're saying sapphire scales are kind of like being bukake'd by Saint Saturn? I mean, I really didn't need that image, but yes. Although I should clarify something. Saint Saturn didn't infect Ginny with the sapphire scales on purpose, or more accurately, he didn't experiment on her with the end goal of Ginny developing the disease. Saturn was working on creating another unknown drug for unknown purposes, and Ginny developing sapphire scales was a side effect, a sign that the intention of Saturn's experiment had failed. And I'd be both fascinated and terrified to find out exactly what Saint Saturn was trying to do here, whether it was a drug intended for use amongst the world nobles, or whether he was simply trying to create a brand new torture device to continue to use on all of the insects he collects. It really could go either way. And with that, I'd like to take this opportunity to point out that Saint Saturn might be the first truly evil villain we've had in One Piece. Most other villains have done categorically evil things, but that's not necessarily who they are at their core. Many of them are misguided, shaped by circumstance or necessity. And you know what? Even the average world noble, I don't know if I'd necessarily call them evil, because I don't think they're aware that their actions are evil. They're like children with far too much power and a surgically removed moral compass. Saturn, on the other hand, he knows exactly what he's doing and he relishes in it. That is the key difference. It's quite demonic and genuinely unsettling in a way that I've never felt before in One Piece. Thoughts on what Dragon is planning? Nothing. Right now, I'm pretty sure he's just thinking about what bottle of wine to have with dinner. To be fair, that's an important decision. If you pair the wrong wine with the wrong meal, then you're going to lose a lot of the subtle flavors, so there's a lot to think about. You keep saying that Bonnie's powers would get weaker as she gets older, because the world is horrible. But it's also the same weakness in Luffy's fruit. I agree. Not only that, I agree that it's the same strength in both. Bonnie and Luffy's fruits operate on a very similar level. At their core, they function best when the user disregards reality and believes that nigh on anything is possible. And what should be of particular concern to the world government is that these fruits have a compound effect on one another. On her own in this world, Bonnie can't do a whole lot. That imagination can only carry her so far, given that her whole life has been so full of pain and isolation. However, once she does finally make the connection that Luffy is Nika, which just as Saturn says in the chapter, I can't quite believe that she still hasn't done yet, but once she does, Bonnie is going to believe that anything is possible. If she registers that Nika of all things exists, then Bonnie becomes completely free and her powers are unrestricted. If Nika exists, everything can exist. Why not? And then the world government are just gonna have to sit there and say,
"This is getting out of hand. Now there are two of them."
Bet Kizaru is the one who fed Luffy. Lightspeed food delivery. So I'm still not 100% convinced that it was him, but I would very much like to share this picture I found on Twitter. And look, if Kizaru does end up being the culprit, then this meme, much like a man's dreams, will never die, and he will forever be known as the Uber Eats Admiral. Delicious justice. But the other thing about Kizaru being the feeder is that sure, he can move at light speed, but surely the Egghead Island food machines can't produce food at light speed. And if so, then essentially what this theory is stating is that Kizaru blinks away, finds himself a food machine, then presses some buttons, and has to wait for all of the food to appear and then blink back. The blinking back and forth, that's no problem, happens instantaneously. It's the waiting. He'd just be standing there while the machine goes brrrr, You all know how machines sound. And then he'd have to do that like, I don't know, 30 to 50 more times to produce the sheer pile of food we saw. Although I love the idea that if you look closely, there's even a drink in the pile, so Kizaru would have had to have been considerate enough to think that Luffy might want something to water it all down. Although someone in my comments also suggested that it could be Usopp sniping the food to Luffy, which is really cool. Others were very confused and thought Robin was the one delivering the food because of all the hands, but those were just Luffy's hands moving really fast. It's a really intriguing mystery though. Of all of the Egghead Island intrigue we've had to date, you know, the traitors and the shadow monsters, that one we still haven't solved, but right now, don't care, because the thing I am most invested in is who fed our captain. It's always nice to see Yamato in the color spread. I'm assuming the dragon is Momonosuke. Oh yeah, so I didn't talk about the color spread, but I actually really like it. So because this chapter officially comes out in 2024, this is Oda's celebration of the upcoming Year of the Dragon, and that's why all of the Straw Hats have either Momonosuke on their clothes or a color variant of Momonosuke. Zoro in particular has a green one, which gives me some very strong Shenron vibes. I get Momonosuke though. Year of the Dragon, he's an obvious choice. But I can't help but feel like Oda is just trolling with Yamato at this point, showing us an image of the crew that could have been. Although I also want to highlight Franky because damn, this might be my favorite Franky hairstyle to date. It's a shame that he didn't have it on Wano, but I guess it would have been such a pain in the ass to draw regularly. Not that Franky was in a lot of Wano, so you know, it wouldn't have come up that often. Although in World, it may have seemed a bit disrespectful to wear one's hair in the style of the giant dragon currently occupying and enslaving the country. This punch will either miss or do absolutely nothing to help. That's what I'm afraid of. Because as blue-balled as I am to be denied the satisfaction of watching that punch land, there may be a reason for that. Saturn himself is still a very unknown quantity, and he has already shown that he's fairly immune to classic damage, or at least the sword damage we saw. Right now, he also seems fairly immune to Devil Fruit abilities as well. Bonnie tried to use her powers on him, and nothing was happening. And not in a Thriller Bark sort of way either. Genuinely, nothing was happening this time. So she either tried to reverse his age, but Saturn is just so old that it has no visible effect, or our colossal spider lad may have a Blackbeard-style negation effect in play. Or third option, Saint Saturn is immortal, and that frozen state of being is the direct counter to Bonnie's abilities. Saturn has no potential futures. He's locked in. He's locked in to this. Of all of the things to choose, you chose this form. But assuming the former, maybe that's the reason why Kuma is using a Haki punch, because he knows that his classic Devil Fruit powers may not work. But even if the punch does minimal damage, I need it to land because Mate Kuma, he deserves this. There has never been anyone in One Piece more deserving of a punch. Not Bellamy, not St. Charlos, it is St. Saturn, so we need this. And you know what? You let me know in the comments. Is this punch going to land? And if so, just how satisfying is it going to be?